The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, see everything we do. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes with Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. Sometimes as a publisher, we discover artists that are absolute rock stars that can really paint circles around everybody. Bob Rohm is an author of a book on painting. He knows how to teach painting, and he has so many secrets. You're going to absolutely love this video. In fact, I sat down with him and he taught me two things, just two little things that changed everything in my painting that I've adopted since then. I hope you enjoy this video.
Hi, my name is Bob Rahm. Today I'm going to be doing a painting of a mountain scene, mountain vista, with a stream in the foreground. We're going to do 16 by 20. Okay. We've got a 12 by 16 painting that we're going to work from. This painting was done up in part of Colorado, the southwest corner. It's a place that I think if anybody's been up there painting, they probably know this scene. There's a beautiful stream that flows through the valley there, and it's near Ouray. It's on the other side of the mountain from Telluride, Colorado. This was done in the early fall, so the trees are starting to change color, but they haven't changed over to the yellow and the orange yet. They still have a touch of green to them. So I'm going to paint similar kind of color to that. But I do want to add a little bit more color into the mountain and get a little bit more color into the trees as well. The study that I have here is a little bit monochromatic and a little dull. So we'll hopefully pick that up quite a bit. Morning light, we really want to get the warmth of the sky up here, emphasizing the sunlight coming over the mountains. Let me get my palette out. Just using some mineral spirits here. Use that mostly to clean my brush. Okay, I'm going to use mostly bristle and then some nylon bristles. The nylon brushes used to be terrible, but in the last few years they've come out with some brands of nylon bristle that have really become very nice. They're a little bit softer than the bristle, but they carry a lot of paint and they work really well. So I'm still using both bristle and the nylon. So, a couple palette knives. Don't really paint with them too much anymore. And I'm lucky enough that I brought a whole bunch of brand new brushes with me. So they're all clean and crisp. I love painting with new brushes. Okay, lately I've been working with a fairly limited palette, and I usually use the three primaries and then one or two convenience colors that I add to that, and I use a couple of grays. Now I lay my palette out with the primaries up to the middle here and then the grays off to the right side. Now I'm left-handed, so as a right-handed painter you would do just the opposite. Okay. I usually use a Payne's gray rather than a black. Sometimes use a chromatic black, which gives you a nice color. Within the grays, I typically will work with a neutral, very neutral gray color. And usually in the lights, the lighter value colors, you end up with a warmer gray tone. So it's very important to go with a neutral. Some grays that you can buy on the market tend to be very cool. And when they get mixed with the warm colors, they can get kind of muddy. Now in the shadows on this painting, I'm going to paint mostly with cooler colors. So I'm going to use a cool gray for the darks, and they won't really affect things in a negative way. So I'm going to start by putting some white out here. Next to it, I'm going to put some cadmium yellow pale. You can use light. Some of them, some of the lights you have to be careful for. They appear to have a little bit of white paint in them, and so I want to avoid those. Use a little cadmium yellow deep, get a little bit of that oranger tone, and then I'm going to use a cadmium red medium here. Be a nice rich red. And then I'm going to use cobalt blue. We could use ultramarine blue, but the cobalt is a nice clean color. And since I'm going to put out Payne's Gray, if I don't feel like I can get dark enough, the Payne's Gray will get it plenty dark. That's an extra red. Okay, and this is going to be my middle value of gray. It's a very neutral middle value. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. I don't always put it out, but I'm going to put out a dark middle value color. And this one is a cool dark monochrome value. And then I'm going to put out the Payne's Gray as well. Payne's Gray is really black. It's just that the Payne's Gray is kind of a bluish black. Now, if you don't have the middle value gray on your palette, it's no big deal. You can mix one quickly. You can take a little blue, take a little red, make a nice violet out of it. Okay, and then being a violet, the complementary color to that, it's actually a little bit more red. Probably ought to put a little more blue into that. Anyway, it's still heavy in the red. You can add some yellow. Let's go to the yellow orange since it's so red. And then that'll dull it down. Okay, so this is giving me a nice local color to work with. It's kind of what I see up here in this painting. Okay, now if we take that and put it down here, it's a really dark color. But we can take some of it and we can add white to it and we can make that middle value. So it's just convenient for you to have this tube of middle value gray on here. Like I say, you can mix one so easily and quickly. Well, not necessarily quickly, but you can mix one easily. Okay, and if you don't want it, if you want it darker than that, you add less white. I think I want to make it, go ahead and make it a little bit whiter. Make it a little bit lighter. There, you can see it almost matches what's here. Still getting streaks of the blue and red off the palette knife, which doesn't hurt anything. Anyway, that's a nice light middle value gray. It's a little bit on the cool side compared to my neutral there. And you can see what I have left here is a really dark, strong color. Okay, now when I look at the painting, compositionally on the painting, it's pretty close. The center of interest is down here, but I actually want to lower this line a little bit, very insignificantly. If I wouldn't have told you, you probably wouldn't have ever even noticed that I did it. When I do a painting, I like to think of the painting as terms of thirds. So I'm going to take this and envision, let's use a little mineral spirits here to show you what we're talking about. Envision breaking the painting down into thirds. Divide it horizontally and vertically. Now, any one of these intersecting points is considered an ideal center of interest. So I know, looking at this painting, I want it to be over in this area. And I'm going to use that area as my center of interest. Now, what I want to do before I get started here is I want to tone the canvas a little bit. So I'm going to pick up a larger brush, and I'm going to take this gray that I've mixed, this warm tone that doesn't have any white in it, and I'm just going to put it on the painting a little bit. Use some mineral spirits. And my main reason for this is not to work on a toned surface, but that I want to get some tone down here so I'm not staring at that pure white. And we're going to take a rag and wipe that down. And I don't care if some of this white shows through. I just don't want to work on a glaring white canvas. And then the rag is going to take off most of the mineral spirits, because I hate to work on a sloppy wet canvas. Okay, now I'm going to take this same dark color that we used to tone the canvas with, but I'm going to use it to sketch in my shapes. And I'm not interested in drawing. I don't want to draw a coloring book style and then fill in all those lines. I basically just want to emphasize where design elements are. So I want to see where I want the water coming out. I don't want that angle too severe. So we'll drop it down here a little bit. Carry it over a little further. So again, we're just finding placement of basic elements. I want that tree line back here in the distance. So obviously you can see this vertical and this horizontal and this diagonal are really crucial to the design of the whole painting. Okay, now I do have the river coming down through here, and we're going to go ahead and continue that off. Very minor. Get that in there. We have a sandbar that comes out into the water. It sticks out about that far. Okay. I do want this tree to come over probably about that far. About a third, maybe a little bit more. And I want to go up almost to the top of the canvas. I'm going to keep it inside the canvas though. One of the things they say to do is don't take something out of the canvas or don't put it too close to the edge. If you're going to take it out, take it all the way out or leave it in, but don't put it too close. So I think we're okay there. And anyway, we're not going to go too far with that. Just put a little piece of it here. That represents what we want to do in locating that mass. And then we want to go up and find the mountain area. We're going to lower that a little bit. Bring it down here. And we have the background part of the mountain back in this area. It's hard to resist the temptation to be a slave to the realism of it, but it really doesn't matter because I'm not painting any portraits of that mountain. So it doesn't matter if people know how it looked or not. I think I'll lower that. I like that edge of that mountain being lower than this part of the mountain. It just helps the overall flow, I think, to do that. Drop that diagonal a little bit that way. Okay. Yeah, I like this mountain being a little bit higher than this over here. Just using a little bit of mineral spirits to soften up the paint. I don't want to do it so much that it becomes sloppy and wet on me. Now, we have the lower hills here that are still mostly in shadow. So let's just represent those, get them placed. There is a streak of sunlight that comes down between this one mountain here and this mountain. And I'm only going to indicate that in the drawing. When I lay in the values, you won't see that at all. Let's get the tree line represented. Do like making a connection here, a little bit of a break with the tree line, a little taller here, lower here. Okay. Come out the other side. Do the same thing here, break it. Let's raise this up a little bit. So this is when you want to adjust your composition. I'm going to lower this. Did the same thing here that I did in the original painting, in that I made that higher. I want to lower it and flatten it more. Okay, now for me, this is a pretty elaborate drawing. So you can get an idea of what I usually do. It's not too significant. Okay, now I still want to find some more shapes. And so I'm going to look at these and say, okay, well, this tree works well here, taking up this amount of space. And I want to carry that shape over a little bit further, even though it's not one tree. I have a middle value, or middle tree here. And then I'm going to bring another one over further. And I'm not going to make it as tall as this one, even though in the other scene, they're about the same height. Okay, I'm going to drop that down. Okay. So again, this stage is about finding these proper angles and finding these placements. So, and like I say, this is much more, I don't want all that in there. I mean, I would have left it, but for your benefit, I'm going to pull it back. I do want that bank to run more along here. Okay, there's a secondary break in the water that occurs about here. We're going to put that in. Then there's some bushes that stick up. A little bit of it sticks through. This is mostly out into the dirt, so we're not going to do much with that. Okay, and then we want to find some of the, define some of the shapes. And what we have here is we have some significant shadow shapes. So I have a darker shape in here. We're starting to go beyond the drawing at this point because I'm laying in some of these shapes. Because a lot of times I don't even do this. I just pick up the big brush and start laying them in. I'm doing it this way primarily to show you what I'm thinking about and to show you that I'm thinking of putting dark masses in here connected to these before I go ahead and do it. I'll connect these values up here. And that way we end up with a mass that looks more like that. Okay. And we go ahead and draw the shadow shape that's sticking out across the bottom of the water here. Okay. So that's more than enough in terms of the drawing. Okay, put some tree trunks in there. What I have here is I've indicated where my center of interest is going to be. I've got your major shapes blocked in, or as indicated where they're going to be. We've got the mountains going up through here, and we've got the masses of the trees in place. So what I have to do next is visualize that in terms of value. Now I did a little value study here, and this little value study just shows the massive dark and the dark over here, and then how it connects through here, and the stronger whites, and the white highlights in the water and the white of the sky. And you can see the whole background mountain is two values. It's the light middle value and the dark middle value. And these trees are the light middle value. Nothing gets up into the white range on that. The white is reserved for these areas in the water and on these couple of bushes here. That way, even these trees here, there's no light. It only goes up into that light middle value. That way, we emphasize this as the center of interest. And this up here is equally strong, but because we have the sharp edges here, that's going to dominate and be the center of interest. Okay? You can see I indicated a little piece of light coming across the mountain there. Okay, I'm still not quite pleased with where this line is falling. So we're going to lower that just a little bit more. Again, I don't want too much wet paint on there. When I stand back and look, it's about the same place it was. Don't want too severe an angle there. Come across here. These are the things you have to work out. Make sure you have right. Now stand back. Okay. That's better. That's close enough to not worry about too much. At this stage, anyway. Okay. So now I want to block in the major shapes, get my major value relationships working. So I'm going to take a pretty big flat brush, come down here. I'm going to use a little bit of that gray color already mixed, add some blue, more blue to it, because my shadow areas in the darks are really cool. And I don't want to get this too wet with mineral spirits. So it'll take you longer to fill it in like this because you're trying to fill in the tooth of the canvas. But I think in the long run, the painting is better because of it. And I don't mind changing this mixture every time I come down here. Because if I change this mixture, it just adds variety into the painting. What's important is that I get the value relationships working down here. So I want my pattern of dark to come across there and up into this tree that's here. And a little bit of mineral spirits. Again, not much. Not sure what brand of red I put out there, but obviously it's a strong one, because I usually have to take less of it than I do for the other mixtures. Okay. This is also fairly strong dark up in here. And then that dark comes on over to my center of interest tree. Okay, so those are the only real dark masses within the painting. And those are the only masses that I can see that don't have some white in them. So now I can move into the other grays and really lay in the rest of the painting. So when I look at these other grays, I see there's this dark value back here, and I can add just a touch of white to it. And we can add some blue to it because it's relatively cool. Okay, and I know I want the shadow across here. It's not light enough. I want that value a little bit lighter, but not as light as the light middle value. It's plenty light enough on the palette. Yeah, we're plenty light enough. So we'll just get it in here as it mixes with the other colors. Drag it out. The shadows from these trees come out onto the little land mass here. So let's pull that dark out onto here. We have some of that darker mass up into the trees. We have a little transition of it actually. Again, this is a dark middle value, so it's going to serve as my transition between the darks and the lighter color. Okay, and we'll put that up in there. Whoops. Add some dark in the brush. Try and get rid of that dark that was in there. Now we move back, and I'm going to go dark on this mountain back here because it is in shadow. Where it touches the tree dark, I'm going to let it go. Doesn't matter. My goal at this point is just simply filling in the shapes with the right value masses. Stand back once in a while and ask yourself what you're doing, how's it going, do things really fit there? Like I say, don't be afraid to change the color as you mix. It'll only add variety to it as you paint. It's a big mass. It takes a lot to fill it. Still working the dark middle value. Just a little bit of mineral spirits to soften it up and not make it too wet. I remember some of that was really dark. Okay, and then these background trees are dark along the base. The beauty of painting like this is pushing edges back and forth. So paint through things, paint around things, and reestablish them. But if you paint too much edge to edge and too much coloring book style, it's going to be a shortcoming. A little landmass out here has a little dark at the edge. This has a little dark at the edge. This I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm not painting shapes anymore as much as I am drawing and thinking about how we're going to paint that. Okay. But just trying to make sure that I have all the darks in place. So I have the darkest dark middle value. And now I'm going to go into the, well, wait, this back here. Except for the top of that mountain, I think that should be mostly in that dark value range. Let's make it a little bluer since it's more distance. That's the kind of thing we can make more subtle, and we can change as the painting moves on. Because we got that in there in the drawing so that we could understand it. And now that we understand it, we can move in. Okay. So that's much better. All right. Okay, sticking with the same big brush, I'm going to lay into the light middle value, and that's the one I have here, which is a lighter middle value. And I'm going to go ahead and add some yellow deep into that. And again, that's because we, as we said, we're at that time of year when things are changing, but they haven't changed yet. But you can see that we have the light hitting the tree or trees. And they're really in a middle value range. So you don't want to go too light You want to reserve the lights. I'm trying to work with basically a 4-value pattern here. Okay, that's good enough. As he puts another stroke in. Now, I want to come back here and find some of the color that's on these trees in the distance. And I'm going to pull that right down. I want to leave these little breaks in here so that my darks connect. Just in a couple spots. Okay, and let's make that center of interest tree a little bit yellower, but again, still in the same value relationship. Again, we want to keep going through middle value shape. We're going to make all this ground in here the middle value, the light middle value. Find the edge of the water here. And then there's a sandbar here. I'm going to change color for it. And we have these bushes that are sticking out here. But again, I'm trying to get the big masses in place. Get a color down that works for them. I use a little bit more yellow and a little bit touch of red just to do these this section of land out here. You do a good job of that, you'd be amazed how much of it stays in the final. Now the ground plane there can be a little cooler. So I'm going to stick with that same middle value. But I'm going to make this background plane just cooler. Getting a little ahead of myself here. But that's just kind of a note to me. Say, remember to make it cooler. Okay. Now, a couple things I want to change here. Oops. Besides losing my balance. I want to take the same middle value, but I want to make it a little pinker. Add a little bit more red to it. So even though we're changing the color up on it quite a bit, it is the same middle value. Because I want to represent what's going on with these sandbars, which are actually rock bars. And then they come out into the front as well. I'm going to make most of this out here. Now, if I was painting out on location, this is the same way I would approach it. Looking at my masses, trying to get in the shapes, trying to get in the right value relationships. Okay, now let's clean off this brush a little bit. Maybe I'll even switch brushes. Let's go with a bigger bristle brush because it carries more paint, a little thicker. If you rinse them in mineral spirits first before you add paint, when you add the paint, it won't get buried up into the hilt, and it'll be easier to clean your brush. Still working in the middle value, in that light middle value, but this time I want to get a lot bluer. So I'm going to take that and add a lot of blue to it. And if you think it darkened it too much, add a little bit of white, get back to the value you wanted. Okay, that's pretty close. So now I want that, that's too dark. As soon as you get it up on the canvas, it looks all right on the palette, but when you get it up on the canvas, you can see it's too dark. I want to get this cooler out in here, get more representation of the water. I try not to leave a lot of little white ghosty effects between edges. It's easier to fix them as you move on. Those little white things are really hard to get rid of later on. A little bit of the blue water out here. Okay, and other than those couple pieces of snow up there on the mountain, that whole upper section of the mountain is a light middle value, but very cool. So I'm going to do that. Changing up the shape of it a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting.
You like it the instant you see it. A landscape painting that soars to distant vistas, shimmers with sparkling water, dazzles with foliage in sun and shade, throbs with shadows dappled in beautiful reflected light, all painted in perfect harmony. But how can any artist get all those spectacular harmonious effects? More importantly, how can you get all these effects? Bob Rahm is just the master artist you need to show you how to get gorgeous results. Results that will win you recognition and respect as an accomplished landscape painter. So here's the really good news. He's ready to share those amazing insights in his new video, Harmonious Landscapes. Discover what it takes to move your viewer's eye around your painting. Bob shows you how to arrange big masses in a composition that keeps things interesting but not too busy. Limiting detail is just one of the many secrets he shares for creating a great composition. In landscape paintings, temperature is not about the weather. Bob has created a simple color palette to help you easily achieve warm and cool mixes. Just the right warm and cool passages give you a realistic feel to the atmosphere you are painting. You can count yourself among the fortunate to have learned from a modern-day landscape master such as Bob Rohm. Available on DVD or digital to view on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Order Harmonious Landscapes with Bob Rahm today.
Well, that was Bob Rohm. You can learn more about that at lilyartvideo.com. Now let's get to know Bob. What a nice man. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. Today we have Bob Rahm with us. Bob, welcome.
Thank you.
So you're this unbelievably fabulous painter. You've been painting for how long?
I've been painting all my life. Started as a teenager. I quit for a few years after art school. I was in the video and film production business, and it's in the late 80s, I kind of quit that and started painting again.
Well, I want to kind of delve into that a little bit. So what is your first recollection of art or noticing art?
Geez, when I was really young, I always drew and sketched and stuff. And when I was about 12, my aunt took me to the Philadelphia Museum to see an exhibit of the Impressionists. And that's when I realized that I wanted to do that. I was just blown away.
You grew up in Pennsylvania?
I did.
Yeah, so did you get to the museums very frequently as a child?
I didn't. My family was not the type that was into the fine arts at all, and my aunt was a little bit more progressive, and so that's why one of the times when I visited her, she took me to the museum, knowing that I had an interest in art.
Was there a particular painting that you can remember that really stood out?
Not a particular painting, but a particular painter, and that was Claude Monet.
Yeah.
And it was just the first one I really discovered, and then shortly after him, it was Edward Hopper that I really locked in on.
So you went through elementary school, drawing and so on, and then you went to art school.
I did, and it was mainly an illustration commercial art school, but they did do some fine art in association with the illustration, and I was more interested in that. Mm-hmm. And some of my friends went on to Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts and Temple University. I wasn't able to do that. I had to get out and work. So I got a job with a film company out of art school.
And what kind of things were you doing in the film company?
We were doing industrial films for Kodak and Armstrong World Industries. Mm-hmm. All kinds of training and marketing and that type of thing, non-theatrical type of production.
So I'm always curious when I hear stories about people who were in a job, another industry, and then all of a sudden they quit to become an artist. Was there a seminal moment that you said, I can't do this anymore, I have to focus on my art?
Well, I painted for a long time after art school as a Sunday painter while I earned a living in the film video business. And then that got too demanding and I stopped painting altogether. And then when I went back to painting, I never really left it. I always wanted to paint. And so I got really frustrated with the film video business and dealing with the clients and so forth. So I got a break and I painted several paintings real full time. And that's kind of when I decided that I'm going to get back into art full time. And
so did you just go cold turkey? Did you just quit your job?
No, I was fortunate enough to be well established enough at that time that I was able to freelance when I wanted to as a producer, director, and editor also. So for the next 10 plus years, I would spend most of the winters in the video and film business and then spend the rest of the year painting. Mm-hmm. And that's how I made the transition then back to painting full time.
So, as you know, I teach marketing, and I'm always curious about artists and the development of their careers. You've become a very successful artist. You're in 6 galleries, I think, something like that.
At least, yeah.
At least. And so you have been making a living as an artist since those days.
Right.
What was that process like for you? How did you become established? How did you get to the point where you were able to make a living?
Mainly, I had to start teaching workshops, which I probably taught long before I should, but it was because I needed the money.
Why do you say long before you should?
I don't think that I was, my skill level was quite high enough. My knowledge was there, but my skill level wasn't up to it, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
And so the information I put out to people was good, but I just wish my skill level was better.
Well, you never know, though, because some of the people who were learning from you probably
Right.
didn't have the skill level that you had.
Right.
And so you were giving them what you knew, and that
Sure.
had value.
Sure. Every once in a while, I'd run into somebody who was equal to or better than, and it was obvious. But for the most part, I was more accomplished than the students were.
Mm-hmm.
But it worked real well.
And how many years did you do workshops?
Oh, long time, since 1990 was when I started with workshops.
And do you still do them?
No, I phased out about 3 years ago.
Uh-huh.
I taught at Ghost Ranch for 25 consecutive years.
Did you really?
Yeah, and that was my longest single location, and I really love Ghost Ranch. But if you'd asked me 4 or 5 years ago if I'd stopped teaching, I'd have told you no. I couldn't envision myself ever not teaching. And then all of a sudden, I just didn't feel like doing it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think I got tired of the travel as much as anything.
Probably.
So I just phased out, and the past 2 years I did one workshop each related to judging a show. And other than that, this year I haven't done any.
So let that be a lesson, folks. If Bob announces a workshop, jump on it, because he doesn't do very many of them.
Yeah, I keep having people ask. They ask all the time, but I'll let them know if I do.
So now that you have the perspective, you've done this quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the right track for an artist to go, or would you tell them maybe a different track in order to get themselves established?
Probably tell them a different track, because I realized at some point, I don't know exactly when, that if I'd have stuck with painting from art school, it would have really been a struggle for at least the first 10 years. But I could have made it, and I could have succeeded as an artist. I didn't have to go to another career. And that's probably my only regret, is that I did do something else for 15 years and freelance plus beyond that.
So you
Now,
lost.
that was nice in that it provided much more income
Right.
than I ever would have had as an artist. But
Well, it also provided you some training in other areas. I would imagine in the film industry, you learn a lot about composition and light.
Sure.
That probably has applied to your painting.
sure, and I learned a lot about photography. Used to do a lot of slideshows back then. That was before the digital age.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's a lot easier now.
yeah,
So the advice then that you're giving to artists is once you get out of art school, or once you're ready, just jump into it.
just pursue it.
Yeah.
If you think you're going to make it and you're willing to make the commitment, then bite the bullet and do it.
I think that's an important lesson, because I encounter so many artists that put it off. I have a friend who's a FedEx driver. He's a fabulous painter, but he says, I really am not going to become a full-time painter till I retire. Mm-hmm. And that's, 20 or 30 years from now. And so he's going to lose all that opportunity. Obviously, he has to make a living, has to support his family, but you're putting it off. And there's probably also a certain age range where you have more strength as a painter, right? You don't lose your energy and so on. Did you find that to be the case?
Absolutely. The peak years are from 30 to 50. And I think it's true of almost anybody physically involved in something. But you really mature around 40 as a painter. And then between 40 and 50 is really when you're really pushing it great, I think. And so if you give up those years to something else, I don't think it's something you'll ever get back. That I think sets you up for when you do enter your mature years. You have all that from those earlier years to lean back on and fall back on and remember. And if you didn't go through that, you're going to have to try to tackle those when you're in your 60s and 70s, when you don't have the energy that you did back in those days.
Well,
So-
we have a lot of people who come into painting after they've left their careers.
Right.
Maybe they never even had taken it up as a child or college or something, but now they're interested in it. So is there no hope for those people?
Oh, there's definitely hope. Some people have an innate ability that they have it whether they spend a lot of time working at it or not. I was one of those people too that said, when I retire, I'm going to go back to painting full time.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the 80s, I had some problems with my eye, my left eye in particular. And I realized, what's going to happen if I get to be 65 and I can't see anymore?
Right.
I'm not going to do the one thing in my life that I always wanted to do. So I first found a way to make that transition and get out of the video and get back into painting, because I did not want to miss painting during my life. And
So once you start becoming a full-time painter, everything changes.
yeah, if that's your passion,
Right.
that's it. Yeah,
But you go from doing nights and weekends like I'm doing
yeah.
to painting all day, every day, or many hours every day.
Right.
How long from that point does it take before you really see maturity set in as an artist?
I don't know that you ever do. I mean, I look back at paintings I did 20 years ago, and there's elements of them that I like better than what I'm doing now. And I look at things I'm doing now and say, there's no way that I would give up this for what I did then.
Right.
So it's hard to say.
Yeah.
I do like the maturing that my painting has done, but it's definitely different than it was. And I don't know that I would judge better or worse. For me, it's better,
Yeah.
not necessarily for sales.
Well, there's a I don't know if it's a myth, but there's this belief that at least if you're doing it 6 or 8 hours a day, 3 or 4 or 5 days a week versus, a little bit on the weekends and nights, that you're just going to get more tuned up. I know when I stop painting for a while, I lose it.
Sure.
I'll take time off and just not do it, and then I'm rusty. But when I go to my event in the Adirondacks, for instance, I paint every day. I paint twice a day. At the beginning of the week, I'm not painting well. By the end of the week, I'm painting really well.
Good.
So I would imagine that if you're doing that every day consistently for a long period of time, you're going to see a positive curve.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that completely.
Yeah.
Because every once in a while you hit layoffs, and for whatever reason that is, business or family, whatever, and you definitely notice a difference. And it takes a day or two to get back into the swing of things.
So what's it like having to feed 5 or 6 or 7 galleries enough art that they're going to have art to sell and enough that you can make a living?
Unfortunately, it's not a problem for me because they don't sell that quickly.
Yeah.
Some artists sell virtually everything they paint, and for them it would be a problem. They can only handle 1 or 2 galleries at the most.
Uh-huh.
But for me, I keep them well supplied and occasionally have to trade things out. So
And do you paint pretty fast?
I do.
Yeah.
I've always been a fairly quick painter. I think I think painting plein air helps develop that into an artist. You tend to do things in a style that you can accomplish in 2 to 3 hours. And so if you do that a lot, when you're painting indoors, you kind of adopt that same style, even though you don't have the same constraints on you that you do outside.
So did you start out as a plein air painter, or is this something you discovered somewhere along the way?
I discovered it along the way. I mean, I did do some of it back in art school way back when, but it was never a thing. It was mostly working live from the subject more than it was experiencing the outdoors.
So people tell me that they have pretty interesting changes in their work once they start going outdoors.
Oh yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I know for a fact the first 2 years I painted outdoors, I threw away everything I did. And even to this day, when I go outdoors, I never paint outdoors with the intent of getting a finished painting for the gallery. If it happens, great, but that's never my intent. Whereas if I'm in the studio, I expect every painting coming off the easel to be a gallery painting. And so that's a mindset that's just totally different.
So it removes the pressure, doesn't it? It creates pressure in the studio, but it removes the pressure outside.
Well, it needs to, because one of the things that I found a lot of students getting hung up with is that they were always concerned painting outdoors that they did a masterpiece and they did something really good. And that's not what was important.
Right. What
was important was seeing those elements and getting the proper relationships down. And once they got that, that's what mattered, not whether they had something they could take home and put in the gallery or take home and stick in a frame.
Can you talk about what those relationships are?
Having a good color relationships from dark to light, capturing a good value relationship in terms of what the scene is. Do you have a pattern of high key, middle key, low key? Do you make sure you have a dominance over one or the other? And mostly it's capturing the relationships, because you picked a scene for a particular reason. So now it's a question of making sure that you get those relationships. Don't get the sky too light or dark for what the scene was that attracted you, and don't get the trees too light or dark for the scene that attracted you.
Well, and so you're always making a comparison.
All the time.
All the time. Sky to trees, trees to grass, trees
Right.
to rocks, everything that you do.
Right.
You're relating one to the other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important to design the canvas right away to determine where you're going to have the center of interest or what would work as a center of interest. Not in terms of rendering detail, but in terms of maybe that's the strongest contrast, brightest color, what have you. And getting that located compositionally within the painting. And then from that point on, making sure that your inner relationships all hold together and work well.
So what are your philosophies on composition? There are lots of different approaches to it. As you know, you've probably heard them all.
Yeah, my simplest approach is just to use the rule of thirds. I divide the canvas top to bottom, horizontal and vertically in thirds, and then that gives you 4 intersecting points.
So it's like a tic-tac-toe board.
Right, and any one of those 4 points is an ideal location for the center of interest. So it doesn't matter which one of those 4 you choose, but put something there and make that your center of interest.
Now, do you, some people will put a center of interest in one of those intersections of the lines, but they'll also try to put something else of interest in those other places.
Sure.
Do you do that?
Yes, absolutely. You want to lead the eye around the painting.
And how does the eye come in? Does the eye read like left to right, right to left?
I think normally it comes in from the left to the right. And generally you're trying to make a circle around many ways like the Nautilus shell and end up at that central point where your center of interest is.
And what kind of tools do you use to try to drive the eye? Because it's real easy. We see a lot of people will take the eye right off the canvas, for instance.
Yeah.
What are the things that will help lead the eye, and what are the things that take the eye away?
The eye is drawn to warm color and contrast. So anytime you want to attract the eye to a particular spot, just increase the color temperature or the contrast in that spot and then let it move on. Don't be careful not to make it compete with your center of interest though. So I usually try to establish the strength of my center of interest, not resolve it, but describe the strength of it right from the start. And that way I can, as I develop the painting, I can make those elements move and guide you around. Now, that same kind of contrast and warmth of color on the edge will take the eye right out. So you may have a very warm area and a strong contrast on the edge. You just have to minimize that. It's like a white tablecloth in a still life. You never want to paint it white down at the edges. You always want to gray it off down to the lower parts so that the eye will never go down there onto the edge and off, but it will follow it around to your center subject.
So when you go outdoors, do you paint you look at the scene, you probably do a sketch?
No, not anymore.
No. Okay.
I used to do sketches a lot. Now I just go right for the canvas.
And do you put your center of interest in first and then work your way out?
No, I usually I identify it. I know where it is, but I block in the structure of the shapes and start with the dark masses and how the darks tie in and move you to the center of interest. Okay, that's kind of how I start. So again, I know where it is before I put brush on canvas, but I don't necessarily put it there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I also believe in pushing edges back and forth. I love the beauty of sliding paint around the canvas. I don't ever draw like a coloring book and then fill in the spaces and be married to a hard realism line drawing. I love just getting a rough placement of where things are and then pushing things, because I love what happens to the paint on the edges as you slide things back and forth.
And do you paint pretty thick?
It varies. Sometimes it does get very thick, but there are plenty of times when it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And what about shadow areas? Some people have different philosophies about shadows. Color of shadows, temperature of shadows, transparency of shadows. Do you have any thoughts on any of those?
Yeah, I always try to keep the shadows simple. Keep all your detail and information in the lights. Make sure your shadow relates to the color of the sky. Even if you're only showing the horizon, envision what the sky is overhead, and then make sure that the sky is reflected in the shadows. For example, if you have a blue sky day, don't make your shadows purple or violet. They always have to relate. That goes back to what all the painters always said. They always said, make sure that any landscape you do has a piece of the sky. They're not talking about literally seeing the sky, but they are talking about seeing the color of the sky reflected into the shadow planes.
So what I think I hear you saying is if the sky is blue, the shadows are blue?
Yes, absolutely.
And if the sky is yellow, the shadows are yellow?
Right. If it's a hazy, bright day with very gray sky, then the shadows are going to be kind of colorless and be more of a gray tone. They won't be. They may even be warm. They won't necessarily be cool, depending on what the rest of the scene looks like. They may just be darker than the lighter areas. Of course, in a completely overcast, you don't get any shadows. But a cast shadow is always lighter than an upright shadow because it's getting the reflected light from the sky, where the upright shadow is not. It's not getting any reflected light. Or if it is, it's getting it from another object, which changes the color completely. But the cast shadow is always getting the skylight, and it's always going to be that color.
Interesting. I'm curious about how your painting has changed over the years. You started out in one particular direction. Are you doing things pretty much the same way you've always done them, using the same colors?
No. No, there's been quite a change in some ways. I used to use a lot of earth colors early on. I think that's mainly because of experience with mixing, that you tend to use a lot of the earth tones because you're not comfortable mixing them. But very quickly I went to a warm and cool primary palette, and then I pretty much stuck with that for a long time.
Can you explain what that is to the people who might not know?
I always had 2 yellows, 2 reds, and 2 blues. And those blues might be something like a cerulean blue and an ultramarine, or it might be a cobalt blue and even a viridian green, something like that.
So one of them is warm and one of them is cool.
Right. Cobalt being the coldest blue you can have. In the reds, a lot of times I would go with a alizarin and a cad red light. And in the yellows, I would go with a cad yellow light and a cad yellow deep. That way we always had the warm and cool. Some people prefer the cadmium lemon, but that was always too cold for me. I didn't go that far on that.
And so you said used to. What are you doing now?
Now I've gotten pretty much into just a primary red, yellow, blue palette. I do vary that a little bit once in a while. For example, most of the time I put a second warm color out, like a cad yellow deep or cadmium orange, or maybe even a cad red, but only one of those. Sometimes I put out 1 or 2 blues, depending on the amount of blue, cool color in the scene. But I'm also always using grays now, and I didn't do that before. I always have a middle value gray on my palette. It seems to have done a lot for me in terms of improving the structure of the painting. It keeps my key of value in the painting from getting too far one way or the other. And I might have a mass of middle value tree, as an example, that I may have used too many lights and darks, too many colors that change value too much. Whereas if I use some of that middle value to mix those colors, I tend to stay truer with the value range of that mass of color within the tree.
So you're not painting the gray direct, you're putting the gray into the colors.
Correct. And I do sometimes put the gray down as direct and then add color to it. And it is surprising how little the gray tends to affect the color. You can still put the color into the gray and still achieve all the color you want. I've really been surprised by that over the years. I would have thought that the gray would really muddy and dirty the colors, but it really hasn't seemed to do that. Now I do use a pretty neutral gray. I try not to stay overly warm or cool with it because that would muddy depending on which mixture you put it into. So.
And do you find that the taste of your paintings has changed over the years? For instance, as I mature, I find that I'm using less garish color. You know, I used to use very acidic greens, for instance, because that's what I would see, and I tried to represent what I would see, but those acidic greens don't read well in a painting oftentimes. I mean, some people can pull it off. I can't.
I've always been kind of led by my subject. Sometimes I do use too garish a color, but if I go out and paint on a spring day and it's brilliant greens, I'm going to put brilliant garish green in my paint. And if I go out in the fall and have lots of bright yellows and oranges, that's what's going to be in my painting. So I'm kind of, I've gotten a lot more neutral tones into my paintings over the years, and I think that's where I've improved a lot. But I still definitely use garish color if that's what I'm looking at. So.
Well, it takes a master to pull that off.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. But the thing I do have a lot of trouble with are flowers, because a lot of times flowers are way too brilliant for the color palette that I'm used to working with.
Right.
And so sometimes if I know I'm going to be painting some really bright, brilliant flowers, I will have to throw a color on my palette that will hold up. For example, I use a lot of mineral colors, not man-made colors. Man-made colors tend to hold up really well as you add white to them. So, for example, your reds, you want to use phthalo reds and phthalo red rose if you're going to paint those really luscious pinks in flowers. Because the cadmium reds, like I'm using, when you add white to those, they really dull down, and you're not going to get any vivid flowers out of them. So
that's a good tip.
Watch what color you're using, knowing your subject.
So for the beginner who's watching this, who maybe this is the first time they've picked up their brush, maybe they're learning from scratch, what is the process that you recommend someone follow when they're learning to paint? Is there a way that they can maybe take some shortcuts so that they don't have to go through years of experience? Are there certain things that will help them get along faster?
I don't think there's any real shortcuts, but I do think if you concentrate on visualizing the shapes and getting the structure of the painting down so that you have a good value relationship, that's most critical, whether you ever finish the paintings or not. If you concentrate on making that work, just doing lots of really good starts and making that plan work, then you can start concentrating on what is the temperature of the colors. Is the painting mostly warm color or cool color? So now you've got good value relationships, and now you get good color temperature relationships working. And then you can start manipulating those shapes and modifying all those shapes so that you may have a mass of a mountain that is all kind of a blue-gray color. Suddenly you can start putting some cool grade greens and some cool grade violets, but all the values are correct. And that way that mountain plane now has all that liveliness of color, but it still structurally holds where it's supposed to. And the same with the foreground trees or whatever subject you're looking at. So initially just see those flat shapes, then begin to modify them. So I would describe that as starts. Just do lots of starts.
The tendency of a new painter is to put all the detail in
Oh,
first,
absolutely,
right?
yeah.
So you're basically saying, squint down, look for big shapes.
Right, forget the detail.
Yeah.
If you're worried about detail, take a pencil and a sketchbook and concentrate on detail. If you want to learn to paint, concentrate on the shapes. You can always add that detail to the painting, but you need to start with the structure of the painting first. So if you want to develop your ability to draw, that's fine, but don't try to combine the two too early. Make sure that you understand the structure of painting first.
How do you create form? What's the process to make something look like it's three-dimensional?
I always tell people to envision carving something three-dimensionally out of clay. So if they were sculpting these edges three-dimensionally, what would that look like? Which way would the brushwork go? And how would that look? And as that's seen, catching the light, is this plane up here going to be a little darker? Is it going to catch some of the skylight, be cooler? Is it going to be over here and get some of the reflected light off of this other object? What will that sculpted form look like? And what will those planes of that shape look like? A bush is a perfect example of that. You can look at a bush, and if your light direction is coming from the side, your shadow side's over here, your object next to it may be casting really beautiful reflected light onto the shadow side. The top may be catching lots of wonderful light from the sky. You may get the warmth of the sunlight hitting it, and then you have the shadow side, which is very neutral to the color of the bush. So you can have a whole range of color in that one object.
Well, Bob, thanks for coming in today. It's a pleasure to talk painting with you and to learn from you. I've learned a couple of things already that I didn't really fully understand, so it's been very helpful.
Oh, thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. it's been fun for me as well.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, good.
Well, that was Bob Rohm. You can learn more about that at lilyartvideo.com. I really appreciate you tuning in and watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. I'm Eric Rhodes.
You like it the instant you see it. A landscape painting that soars to distant vistas, shimmers with sparkling water, dazzles with foliage in sun and shade, throbs with shadows dappled in beautiful reflected light, all painted in perfect harmony. But how can any artist get all those spectacular harmonious effects? More importantly, how can you get all these effects? Bob Rahm is just the master artist you need to show you how to get gorgeous results. Results that will win you recognition and respect as an accomplished landscape painter. So here's the really good news. He's ready to share those amazing insights in his new video, Harmonious Landscapes. Discover what it takes to move your viewer's eye around your painting. Bob shows you how to arrange big masses in a composition that keeps things interesting but not too busy. Limiting detail is just one of the many secrets he shares for creating a great composition. In landscape paintings, temperature is not about the weather. Bob has created a simple color palette to help you easily achieve warm and cool mixes. Just the right warm and cool passages give you a realistic feel to the atmosphere you are painting. You can count yourself among the fortunate to have learned from a modern-day landscape master such as Bob Rahm. Available on DVD or digital to view on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. Order Harmonious Landscapes with Bob Rahm today.